Hello and welcome to Two Blokes in a Cave, a podcast hosted by me, Carlton Sin, a traditional Catholic and occasional serious chess player. And joining me as always is the resident philosopher expert and former child model, my good friend Cameron Wright. Cameron, how you going?
Spectacular. How are you?
Good, mate. Well, look, I think today, pretty impressive conversation. We're talking about the four characters as described by Aristotle, which is pretty cool. I'm a big fan of Aristotle, as is well documented. And I think today, going through what he would describe as the four types of men would be really, really interesting. I'm not sure if you're super familiar with the categories. Certainly the names are a little bit interesting, but I mean, vicious character seems a little bit harsh, but
gives you a preconception of what the hell's coming.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I think that'll be really interesting, and I'm not sure. Again, from a Catholic perspective, it does seem to lay a fairly solid foundation for what would later come in terms of vice and virtue for sort of a more faith-based group of people or way of thinking. So I'm quite interested to know if in your readings this would have been one of those categories that might have been widely used through the ancient world as a measure of a good man, because these aren't. I mean, obviously the virtuous character is a good person.
He's virtuous.
He's a very good person.
Yeah.
But they're not necessarily, and again, the vicious person seems pretty bad. But like there are two other characters that are fairly ambiguous whether or not they are good or not.
Yeah, definitely.
I think there's some interesting commentary around whether or not the majority of people actually fall in that camp where they're kind of not really good, they're not really bad, they're just kind of, they're just existing, maybe.
And do they think they're good? And do they think they're bad? Objectively,
I think everybody kind of thinks they're good. I think everybody has a slightly inflated sense of self-worth, but no, definitely an interesting one. So I'm not sure what the best way to introduce this for our audience might be. So what I might do is read out one of the characters, and then I'll give a brief explanation, kind of copying here from Nicomachean Ethics, straight from the source, and then maybe from there we can kind of expand on what we think, and maybe, I'm not sure, I don't want to name and shame anybody obviously, but thinking about people perhaps that are past and what kind of category we might associate them with, or any flaws we might see, because that might be a better way to kind of bring it forward, because some of these terms are a little bit old school, and again, maybe are not familiar with a more modern audience. So
for sure.
Okay, well look, the first character here.
People we know we're going to name and shame them.
Absolutely.
People can't fight back.
That's the people without microphones.
Who have no platform.
We have disabled comments, so there's no chance anyone's going to get us.
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, so I think maybe the first character will be, what do we want to do first? You know what? I think maybe it might be better to go the virtuous character first, and then
because
that's
the way
an
it's
easier
listed
one.
on this summary is it's not exactly in order. Yeah, so you can go whichever.
Yeah,
one
no, I think so. Sure. They're not necessarily like building up. So I think the virtuous character may be the easiest to understand. So I think that might be an easier one to jump to. But the virtuous character essentially is a person who feels no conflict between their emotional inclinations and their moral duty. So the way, as a Catholic, I would sort of pass that would be, every person has their kind of base passions, and those are kind of sex, hunger, anger, things like that are just a base human animalistic desires. And then because we are human, we have this higher reason. So I might be angry at you in a moment, but I'm not going to act violently on that feeling. I have the ability to reason, and that would be my higher faculties, which I think is very, very important, and maybe a distinction between man and beast, but for that another time. And basically, the virtuous character has trained his emotional system to be aligned with his moral inclinations. This is what would be called sort of living in communion with God, right? You have a moral order, you do your best to live within that moral order, and you don't see any conflict between what is good and righteous and what you're feeling. And I think in Catholicism, that is a fulfillment of the natural desires. So, for instance, everyone has a desire for sex, and I think if you have sex with your wife, who you're united in matrimony with, that's a good and proper, ordered way to go about that business. And that's nothing wrong to do, obviously. And that your emotions are aligned with your duty in that sense. Again, as the resident papist, thought it might be important to include that. So, get married for those of you not married.
Subtext. It could be me.
There you go. Yeah. So that's a pretty good overview. That gives us a good indication of the virtuous man, someone whose base passions align with their sort of moral order. Any disagreements with that on the surface? Because obviously there are some things that I might want to add, but I definitely want to get you in on this and see what you think about the moral order and who dictates it and how does one know?
The moral order. Well, I guess it depends on if we're fully agreeing that reason and the moral order in your own mind is, I guess, the same per person trying to tame that emotional or I guess desire. I think I kind of call it as desire.
Yeah.
Or any form of thing that your base human faculties are trying to yell at you to do, but your reason says don't.
Well, I definitely think it is culture specific. I don't think this makes any broad claim that your moral duty is a universal one. Now, I would argue that, of course, it is. A human moral order exists. But I don't think that's what Aristotle is arguing. For instance, I think you could be a good and moral Persian man and have different standards of morality to a good and moral Greek man. I think what he's saying is your moral order and duty as a man is not in conflict with what you perceive to be as good.
Right.
And I think that's interesting because, as a young person, I think that's a really difficult concept to grasp.
It's amazingly difficult.
Well, even growing, as you get older and you slightly more, hopefully more contemplative and think about your role in the world, taking responsibility for more and more. But there is I suppose, as a young single man, it is very difficult to place onto yourself duty and honor and burden and sacrifice. And I think as you get older and get married and have a family, it becomes easier to do that. And perhaps things line up more simply for you. But certainly for a young man, it does seem to almost be restrictive to your freedom. And again, we can discuss freedom another time. And I think that's very, very fascinating. But essentially, you are restricting your ability to do whatever you will. As Schopenhauer would say, you can't will what you will. You can do as you will, but you can't will as you will. So what your base passion pushes you towards is there regardless if you want to do it or not. And I think to impose a stop on that yourself does seem to demarcate a higher intelligence, or maybe, dare I say, a moral, virtuous man.
Well, yeah, definitely. I think that's what he's trying to say with virtue. I guess that's the faculty that people who aren't, animals that aren't human do not have. They don't have that faculty to reason into the way that we should do this for, I guess, the moral good is what he would say. Well, and like what he thinks is good and what isn't good may be varied between different people, but like the fact that you have that faculty that's trying to demarcate between your base desires that someone's come in direct conflict with what you think is virtuous. Yeah,
that doesn't go away when you eventually convert to Catholicism. That stays. That's definitely not. Unfortunately, in some ways, I think. Yeah, in some ways, it is good because I guess the mark of progress is challenge. You can't really grow as a person without being challenged, and to overcome temptation is a great thing, and it speaks to your character, but it wouldn't be particularly virtuous nor courageous nor really anything to report if you never had temptation to do wrong. You'd just be a really banal person, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess.
Because it really, what marks a good person beyond just having your moral frame aligning perfectly with your rational faculties would be, hey, I've imposed upon myself what I believe to be the most right moral framework, and even though it may go against my base passions from time to time, I'm going to live up to something higher than myself, more than myself, and yet might fail, but might do so by daring greatly.
Yeah, well, that's a really good, I reckon, segue into like describing maybe one of the other faculties. So, or one of the other characteristics. So you're
Yeah.
saying we describe the virtuous one in general. It's basically saying that you're, I think, correct me if I'm wrong. The virtuous character here, the reason of this character, and the emotions or desires are not in direct
No, they're not
they're
in conflict.
not.
They're in alignment.
They're in alignment.
Yeah.
This would, for Aristotle, be a person who is virtuous.
Yeah, that's
This
right.
is
Like,
the this is
virtuous
the
person
goal
is aligned.
yeah.
And I think it is important. I think Kant actually talked... Kant obviously came much, much later, a German philosopher in maybe the 18th century, I believe.
Super hard to read.
Super hard to read. Good luck with that if anyone wants to read any of his nonsense. But he's talking about the highest order is not the person who, to what we were just saying, the easiest road would be if your morals align with your duty automatically.
Yeah.
Or you haven't overcome anything. You just are aligned, which is great. But that doesn't mean you're necessarily higher. And Kant said, actually, the highest form would be someone like the... what character is it here? The continent character, which is one who is selfish, amoral, has sort of filthy desires, but he knows that they're wrong and he acts in service to a greater good. For example, an easy one in the modern era would be a man who is committed to his wife, has desires to cheat on her and have an affair, but knows it would be wrong and it would disgrace his wife and doesn't do it.
Right.
And Kant would think that person is actually the highest. Well, that's the highest form of moral good. I guess, again, Kant being sort of an 18th century German person would be much more Christian than
Yes.
our mate Aristotle. So his worldview would very much say we're all fallen. No one really is aligned perfectly with the true moral order, because he's talking a more universal base. And I think, like I said, I think Aristotle's sort of more talking maybe the Athenian moral standard, the Spartan moral standard, as opposed to there is a universal human moral code, moral order imprinted on the heart and soul of man. But knowing the good, being a fallen person with a disordered, perhaps, base passion, call it original sin, call it human inclination to do hedonistic things, but then choose to go, you know what? I made a commitment to a woman to look after her, to protect her, to love her. How can I do that? I'm going to turn down what might be pleasurable in the now. And I think that I tend to agree that that might be a higher moral kind of virtue than just being dead aligned.
Yeah.
Which I think is again, probably sharing some of the attitudes and beliefs with Kant here, but that would be my read of that.
Yeah, well, this is why this stuff's really good to talk about, because it really illuminates the fact that, well, is it really better to be like your desires and your wants align with the good? You are good. You've had no real, I guess,
You
quote
either are or
unquote
you aren't,
demons,
yeah.
or I guess like something
No
coming
test,
at you,
no challenge.
test.
Yeah.
And you're just a good guy. Like, let's say, I don't know. What's a good? There's no examples of this human, by the way. I've got nothing.
Yeah.
I was thinking maybe Hugh Jackman or something. I mean, but that's not really. No, that's wrong. Scratch that.
Scratch that.
I'm thinking
Sorry,
someone's just
Hugh.
really good. Has
He's
like
not coming on
just
the podcast
always
now.
good through and through. Is that person better? Is he coming? Is that person better than a person who's had like a numerous amount of tests? Maybe not even
Fallen
that specific
short.
example. Maybe like has had a hard, rough life.
Sure.
A lot of
Yeah.
desires, temptations, a lot of opportunities to be presented with the wrong inclination. And yet does the reason of that person override those inclinations? Is that a better morally good person than the person who's just good?
Yeah, look, I tend to agree, mostly because it seems to be the story of mankind that we are fallen in innumerable ways. We are fallen, and it doesn't take a particularly religious person to look around society and go, yeah, we could all probably be a little bit better. So where that originated from, we can debate that till the cows come home. But there is an element of we don't live up to maybe our creed, our calling to be good. None of us are born good. Some of us are born better, perhaps, or have less inclination to act out or are more closely aligned. But again, there's so many factors I think that go into that. How about this? This is how I would characterize it on the fly. it's not that a rich kid, grown up trust fund kid with lots of money and two parents, that both love him and work and stay together and raise him well. It's not that his success is discounted or that we go, oh, well, yeah, of course you're successful. You have two parents and you come from an affluent home. But it does sort of strike everybody as not maybe more important or more, or better, but we are moved more by the kid whose mum's on food stamps and dad left and he was able to make something of himself.
Yes,
We all think like that is worth more. And we're not discounting the person who came from a good home, but we are recognizing that if you overcome more, that is worth something. At the end of the day, they both might live, fairly even materialistic, productive lives, but we all kind of recognize like one guy had to work a lot harder.
Definitely.
And we're all, I feel painting a broad brush is generally wrong, but I would say we're pretty much all in agreement that that's more impressive.
Yeah, I think
it's more virtuous, it's more admirable.
It's like, I think part of it's we're projecting the feeling of like, I would love to have done that and got to the end and be like, like there is a part of that where it's like,
for sure,
you did it, you got it. I know that feeling of like extreme, you've been exalted. Like we want to overcome our own demons. We project a little bit, but like there is a definite thing where we do assume that certain people have not been tested as much.
Yeah.
And so if you have been tested and you passed and you moved on, at the end, these two people you just explained maybe have the same skill set. They're producing the same output.
Yeah, they do the same thing.
Capitalism style. They're producing the same work. But this dude...
We can all just admire him more.
Basically. To get those skills required more...
Took more out of him. I think that's probably I think that's a fairly good analogy for, what we're talking about now is having to overcome more. And to that, being tested is, part of life. And obviously we all have tests and different tests and all the rest of it. But that is, I think, we do admire someone who overcomes more. Whether that is, like you said, which I think is very interesting, is that an innate, we kind of project ourselves. Like I would like to be able to do that. And there's certainly an element of, I don't know, maybe... Like I know in my mind, I'm a very confident person. I've been raised by good parents that say, look, put your mind to it. You can go and achieve things. And I typically have I can do that. I can give that a go. I can, I'm competent.
Yeah.
But sometimes, you see things you're like, whoa, that would definitely push me, I think.
Right.
That would be like to my limit. So as a quick aside, I joined the Army Reserves and had a blast. Learning a lot of the skills. Didn't necessarily enjoy the being yelled at for 6 weeks, but I had a blast learning how to shoot, learning how to like camp, dig trenches, war paint, military tactics. Really enjoyed it. And after that 6 weeks, it was during COVID, so I had to go to quarantine. And in my quarantine, so I started looking up like SAS Special Forces training videos and like because anyone can join. You can be a reservist and join. You get one crack.
Give it a go.
You get one crack. And if you fail, you can never join again. Like
is that the case?
It's legit.
Oh, right. Australian. Okay.
So if you go in, same in America, like if you go in and you fail, you can't join the SEALs again, but you might be able to join the Green Berets. Something like that.
Is that right? I thought you could have a couple of goes at the David Goggins type of thing.
I thought you couldn't unless you're medically discharged.
Right.
But if you fail, then you can't join. If you like break your leg, you're like, well, that's
different. Oh, okay. What if you just don't?
So I'm pretty sure
next year, mate.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the case. Anyway, it's not the case in Australia. It is essentially like you get one crack at it, and unless you're medically discharged, and again, medically discharged, they're not, I've got shin splints. Yeah. Mate, you got to push through that.
Well, if you're getting that, you're out.
Yeah, if you're getting that, we're not putting you in Afghanistan, mate. No. I'm sorry. So I started watching this, and again, being really confident, just passing my basic training, feeling really good. I'm watching this stuff, and I think it must have been like some sort of media thing, and they don't show everything, but they show the basics. You get yelled at, you're doing push-ups at 2 a.m. You're staying awake for 5 days. Yeah. And I'm watching this thinking, I don't think I could do that.
No, I don't think
I could do that. And that's probably one of the first times in my life I can genuinely say I looked at a situation and thought that might have me, like that might have me beat, because like I said, and confidence it comes from I think. To be confident comes from a place of preparation and practice and honing your own abilities. And I certainly feel very competent as a person. But when I saw that and what these guys were doing, I was like, that's actually another level. And again, I
it's
don't.
days of abuse.
It's a couple weeks.
Pretty bad.
I think the last test is 5 days with no sleep.
Yeah, that's not.
So I'm just not sure. And I've got 2 kids. And I don't think I could go 5 days with that. I think maybe I've gone a fair whack without any sleep, but I don't know if I could do that. And to be, trying to maintain an alertness is crazy. Like it must be tantamount to basically torture, but incredibly impressive. And I think what I say all this to mean is I do feel a greater sense of like pride when I see those guys. I'm like, you guys are really impressive people, and I really respect what you've gone through to get where you are.
100%.
And I do think that there is this kind of nasty Australian habit of tall poppy syndrome when we see people that do cool things or good things, and we naturally want to kind of pull them down.
It's true.
As Australians. And that's really sad, because I think most people that are really successful, by and large deserve it because they are very competent or they've done really, really impressive things.
On a whole, for sure.
For sure. I mean, look, you're going to have a few people that nepotism their way in, but most people that are running Fortune 500 companies or that are CEOs and CFOs and entrepreneurs, they're very impressive people. Whether that is they just have that grind, they work really hard, or they are just smarter and better. Do you know what I mean? Like they just put in the work somehow, or they grinded at the right time, or they caught the right wave. But I think that is important to say, hey, that's more impressive, I think. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that, which is a very long way of saying, this guy's not too bad either. The content.
Well, as I get older, I definitely appreciate. I try to be more positive on all that stuff. When you're younger, you're like, that guy's no good. No. Yeah, but like in general, most people are trying their hardest and they're doing a pretty good job. And they're really, really trying. I mean, I can't question the CEO that does all that. They've worked really hard. I'm not going to question it, but they can get to the end and is still a piece of shit. Like there is a few of those floating around.
What are you doing? Yeah, no, fair enough. That's fair enough.
Yeah, but anyway,
so they might be an example, perhaps, of the incontinent character.
Yeah.
Which is a person who knows what's right or wrong, but doesn't have the self-control to restrain himself from doing wrong. So to keep in the same example, it would be a man married has the desire, as most straight men tend to, that they want to sleep with women, and he can't stop himself from having an affair.
He knows it's wrong, though.
Knows it's wrong.
Does it anyway.
But doesn't have the self-control. So he would feel bad. So there is that remorse, which is a very important one, because essentially the vicious character is someone who just does not feel...
We've said this is a third character we're referencing. The fourth one is just effectively a sociopath.
The fourth one is just a bad guy who's like, I don't care. I'll cheat on my wife. My only concern is, quote, I don't want her to find out because it would inconvenience me.
Yeah.
And that's obviously not good. But
that's right, yeah.
I do think it's interesting because the incontinent character, I think probably is most people. Do you know what I mean? Like I think most people know what is right, even if it is like kind of a deep down subconscious level. Like they know, shouldn't be doing this. But they do it. And there's that small voice, even if it's something minor, like dropping rubbish on the floor, you kind of know, like,
should I return this trolley to the trolley bay?
Exactly. That's a big one.
Should I put an extra $20 in the pokies? We all know what we need to do. Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. So that is, I would think most of us would be the incontinent character.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how you feel, but just the general sense around the grounds.
Yeah, definitely. As the way it's defined, I think it's interesting because I think this is the most, as much as like, okay, the vicious one on the face of it is the most contentious because like that person doesn't have any morals and doesn't care and is doing whatever they want. That's a dangerous character in society. I think the most contentious is the one we're talking about, where the person who
knows what
is right but can't help themselves because it's contentious. These are the people who are effectively doing really bad stuff that people don't agree with, that then we have to like think about, like, do we put ourselves in their shoes? How much leeway do we give a person who's wronged you? Yeah. Does this person been tempted so much or had such a rough time that their reason's been effectively beaten down and they're just killing? This is actually kind of, I think, more of the interesting one. This is when you commit a crime and you go to court or something and people get very angry about that person they got off because like 3 years. But the backstory of the person might have been a terrible backstory. Like their life was absolute
and the court
garbage.
Does typically do a good job of taking that into consideration.
It's definitely true. But that's the contentious one because people are very black and white.
Well, on this, and I'm out of notes now because this is
We've
it.
gone too far.
No, this is good.
Yeah.
This is good. This on this character, the incontinent character. I think most people are this archetype, but
Yeah.
I also have a really difficult time with the I can't help myself.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
I struggle with it a lot, and it's not because I don't think people have struggled. It's because they don't put the associated value on things.
Right.
So, for instance, a man who beats his wife, oh, I just can't help myself. Well, you don't beat your boss, so I feel like you can help yourself. You just know you can get away with pushing your wife around. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think, not to throw you under the bus here, but you're a little lax with the time. If I said, hey, every time,
I am. Yes,
yeah,
100%.
a little bit.
As a side note, I am late
all the time. But
Not
if I said, hey, Cameron, if you turn up on time to record these podcasts, you will get $100,000. I don't think it'd ever be late. I don't think it'd ever be, because you would put and I'm not having a go at you really. I'm a bit of tongue in cheek, but there is the you would place a higher priority on this thing, and I think the main issue. The main issue I think for me is when people say they can't do something. I'm like, well, I would be willing to bet that you could do something if I offered you something that meant a great deal to you.
Yeah, I would. Yes, I see what you're saying.
So that's my only pushback, because even these people with crappy lives, I'm like, listen, if you don't beat your wife for a year, I'll give you $1 million. Hello, sweetheart. Hey, you're good. Hey, the meatloaf that you've roasted, that's okay. Don't worry about it. It's fine. I just think it's a difference. Right?
Yeah.
It changes. And I think that's what bothers me more than maybe, excuse me, more than like an addict or someone that might have a more physically debilitating ailment. Like, hey, I'm an actual meth head. I cannot, I'm scratching my eyes out here. Like I need help. And again, I suppose from a religious perspective, and I'll let you go in a second.
Yeah.
From a religious, like there is a grace and a forgiveness and a charity that we should extend to everybody. But there also is to receive forgiveness by God or by your fellow man. There has to be an act of contrition. The person who's aggrieved you can't be like, I hit your car, F you, and then why aren't you forgiving me? It has to be like, hey, mate, I'm actually really sorry I hit you.
Yes.
Kid was crying. I got distracted for a second. I looked back and, hit the brakes, whatever.
For sure.
And I think that's one of the things as well that I look to, and I see the videos on, online, your Instagrams, and they get sent around, younger millennial type people that I can't put up with my job, or I can't go, clean my room, or I'm depressed, I'm this and that. And I'm not sure that's necessarily a good enough excuse. And we've extended this, and I think this is such a broad definition. He can't control himself. I think that's too broad. And maybe I'm kind of changing my mind on the fly here. Maybe most of us aren't in this. Yeah. Well, maybe most of us aren't in this category,
right?
Because I think most of us can control ourselves, and that would make us more close to the vicious person. Yeah, if we do know, obviously these aren't the only four archetypes, and certainly as a sort of more traditionally religious person, I do have a hard time putting myself in these four specifically. But there would be something to the effect of like we all do know right from wrong. Yeah. By and large, we have that kind of natural instinct of like, this is wrong. Probably shouldn't do that. This is okay. So yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe most of us know what is wrong and then choose to do wrong of our own will. Because I don't think we are choosing to do wrong because we can't help ourselves. I think that's actually antithetical to Christian teaching anyway. Yeah. So for me, it's hard to get my head around that. I'm like, no, we can choose. Like, you're denying the will of the person, which I don't think is good. Like, I think we all do have a will, and that moves us, that motivates us to act. And I think it's kind of a cop-out to say, like, for instance, you would probably tell me to pull my head in if I, stole your laptop and just said, listen, mate, demons are in my head. You'd be like, okay.
Can I have my laptop back?
Come on, mate. What are you doing? I thought we were mates.
Yeah,
so
right.
it's kind of passing the buck a little bit.
Yeah.
It's like, hang on, man. I understand. I'm getting really down the rabbit hole here about these people that don't exist.
I'm actually running it through as you're talking.
I find it because I initially thought when I read this for the show, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Most people probably sin, which obviously is to miss the mark. They make mistakes, but they don't mean to. They just kind of do. And I got part of me thinks like, oh, I don't know. Like, look, again, thinking of my own life, and certainly no saint yet. Trying my best, but you make mistakes, and looking back, and if you are an honest and reflective person, you're like, I probably did ultimately choose to do that.
Yep.
I mean, in the Catholic faith, like, to commit a sin, you actually have to know it's wrong, so you can't accidentally commit a sin.
Fair enough.
And there are obviously like some stipulations around some like murder and stuff, but by and large, like if you're not properly catechized, no one's holding you to a standard you don't know. But if you know what is wrong and do it anyway. Like, there is an act of the will to go like.
So if I'm like, I'll just fill in this form here, but that form just gets kill someone. I didn't realize it's not like.
Yeah, that's not a sin. Right, you didn't know that. Yeah. So if you, I'm trying to think of an easy one. Like, if you were from a different culture, never heard of Catholicism before, maybe, and stealing was just something that you grew up with, and it was just part of life to you.
Yeah.
Like, and if you stole something from me, not knowing that, hey, stealing's actually quite bad, that wouldn't be considered a sin. I'll probably have to check that with a priest probably. But, but by and large, like, if you have genuinely no idea that is wrong.
Yeah, why'd you leave it out?
It's on the bench, mate.
Yeah.
That would be an example. It's obviously fairly difficult, I guess, in a Western country because we are so entwined with the Catholic moral teaching. Like, it's just hard to separate the two. Yeah. Like, a lot of the things that we take for granted are just that have their roots in the faith of Christ, essentially. Like, even if you're not a Christian or if you're not religious, it's hard to deny that comes from somewhere, and it happens to come from this place. But the main point is, like, I'm getting myself out of my original take. I don't think most of us are the incontinent character. I think most of us know what is right intrinsically, or at least on some level. And then through our weakness of ourselves, which exists in all men, actively choose to sin, to make the wrong decision. Give me some of your thoughts.
So, okay, I would definitely think that we're all the character who knows what's right, and we're not doing the wrong thing in general. So that really makes us the continent character. But the backstory of the continent character is a person who is actually selfish and kind of amoral, but then doesn't do the wrong thing anyway because they think it's all good to not do that. So that's a real defined line, because the incontinent character knows what the right thing to do is, but doesn't do it anyway because they have no control. That's rough. Is there one in between?
Specific. I feel like some of these are very specific to maybe like an ancient Greek person. And perhaps, again, like the way we would call learning the Catholic faith would be to catechize someone in that faith. And I suppose one of the great difficulties in learning other languages or other cultures is that there are so many subtle kind of...
It's the nuance.
Yeah.
It's like, really what
do you actually mean by this? And are you... in this example, and I couldn't find anything that specifically said he was referring to Athenian adult men who have been properly educated in matters of state.
Yeah. Actually, I did a little bit as a side backstory. When you showed me this, I hadn't seen this before in these specific characters, but I did a little backstory, and it's kind of intertwined, and Aristotle does roll from... It's over time. I think he vaguely almost adjusts his opinion, but it does work that way.
This is an earlier
educated thing, to the next thing, to what is like the great moral goods, justice, wisdom, courage. It does intertwine with a lot of complex things, and to get exactly what he's trying to say down pat it takes a bit of time. But I know what you mean. Well, what about this? I think that everyone knows what is good, but the people who do the bad stuff and they know it's bad, kind of... Because we're talking about reason versus desire, they use the reason to reason themselves into committing stuff. Yeah. I guess, does that let them, their desire, they use the reason to say, I really do want to do this and it's all good. For example, I want to steal this bread because I'm starving. there are limits to what you do and don't want to do. Like stealing can't be black and white. There are times when stealing is worse and better than other times. It's like a nuanced thing.
On
It's what
a
I'm trying to get
scale,
at.
yeah. But you wouldn't say that stealing is ever
No, it's not
good.
great.
It's never
No,
good.
I wouldn't say it's
But
good.
you might say perhaps it's justified in the instance of starvation.
You can
I'm not sure
you can convince yourself that it's
I'm not sure I would I definitely think to sin or to make a poor moral decision, say, you do have to do a fair amount of rationalizing.
You do.
And I think there is an element of humanity.
The path to hell is paved with good intentions. Yeah.
And one of the things I love the most about people is that their endless, limitless ability to reason themselves into terrible decisions. Just terrible decisions.
Yeah, you can definitely
And
do
you're looking back like I made some good calls. And then you're like, what's going on here?
What is this?
Yeah.
It's like a brick wall. You've built up all these presumptions and
Yeah.
assumptions. And then you go, definitely the next one is this. And you look back and you go,
Oh, that was terrible. What am I doing? And I guess that's very interesting. It's a very, very interesting thought.
because, go on. Yeah.
No, I'm just not sure. Even though, I guess like reasoning yourself into a poor decision doesn't take away from the poor decision. So I'm just trying to work through because again, going off Aristotle's initial thought process being, if you reasoned yourself into a bad decision, but you convinced yourself it was a good decision, are you a virtuous man because your passions align with your... Because there's no real, he doesn't,
Say that again. You've reasoned yourself into a bad decision.
But because you've convinced yourself that it's good, because no one does bad things and maybe
that means your reason is stuffed, doesn't it? That's a different thing.
I guess, and again, this is one of the great enjoyments of my life is that people that, I went to university with a genuine, a genuine nihilist, and I'm like, your worldview is
Everything
incongruent with what you're saying. Doesn't make any sense. If you truly believe this, it's not real. But there is something really fascinating about, people's ability to make bad things seem good to themselves.
Of course.
And if you do that, and then you follow the passions that lead you into that, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, definitely.
Like, are you now a virtuous person? But I would imagine Aristotle would say, no, you have to have a base level education to say, this is actually wrong. This is actually right.
There is a presumption. If you do nothing and lived on an island, potentially,
Yeah.
with no one around you, and didn't know what was good or bad, and you're just running around smashing crabs and like eating fish and stuff.
Just doing push-ups. That's 100%.
There's an argument there. There's no education. You don't know. There's no interaction. What's good and bad. There's a real base level of nothing going on there.
Well, again, every philosophical discussion, every conversation between two humans, there is several presumptions that have to be considered true for us to even converse. Like, we both have to believe this microphone amplifies and records our voice.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking into them.
Mm-hmm.
And if we didn't believe that, we couldn't get anywhere.
Yeah,
So we have to believe...
this is nothing.
Exactly.
Yes,
we have to have certain beliefs that align ourselves to what we're talking about. When I mention morals, you have an understanding of what that means. It might be slightly different to me, but we both recognize sort of, if you will, the universal moral order. Call it whatever you like, murdering, stealing, raping, things like, more or less, they all actually, now that I think about it, stem directly from an obfuscation of someone else's will. Like me, like what's the difference between sex and rape? The physical act is, I'm not saying the same, but very similar. But what's different is you've taken away someone's will.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it wrong. Like stealing.
Caused harm.
Exactly. Stealing and buying an item, it's the same end goal, but you've taken away someone's labor. You've violated their will is what makes it bad.
Giving nothing.
I think, which is why I think it's such a, it's kind of interesting one, a bit of a segue about the will and like the moral order. And like I said, we have to have a baseline presumption of what things are.
Yeah.
And I definitely think that this is such a specifically like perhaps like ancient Athenian order,
There is
because it does seem very difficult.
Well, I was going to say that leads into what I was thinking. I think back in the day, the Athenians, they believe in like absolutes. It's definitely less nuanced
Yeah.
than there is now. And I think there is a good.
Yep.
It's not like as, relativistic as we maybe think it is now when things are good and not good effectively in different situations. So I actually think when I was like reading about this, I thought to myself, I think Plato and Aristotle think the figuring out of what is the virtue, of what is the reason, actually is attained through Socratic dialogue.
That might be good.
I actually think you can only get it, like you said, education.
Yeah.
I think you can only get it through rigorous conversation. And
I
if you
do, yeah,
haven't done that, then you're actually subject to your own desire. You need to test it. I think that's what do you think? I think that's pretty about right too.
Yeah, look, I think.
And you can see what other people will
agree with me. No, I'm just
I'm not going to
joking.
agree with you, but how about this?
I'm just joking. No, look, I think a lot of the discussions, well, I guess the point of philosophy is to seek truth.
Yeah.
And I think saying that assumes there is a truth to obtain.
Yeah, there's an assumption. The assumption.
Exactly, but there is an assumption. And everyone who is any good, meaning, rational person assumes there is a truth.
Right.
We can all acknowledge that our perceptions may vary and the way we interact with the world may not be the same as somebody else. But we all accept that there is at least a baseline truth that happens, and our perception might be 95% of the truth, say. That's not to say that your subjective reality supersedes that, but it is to say that it's informed by it. And we all communicate via the truth.
That is the most underlying assumption, I think, that really runs through this entire thing. If you don't believe there is a objectable, that's terrible. Is it an objective truth that runs below this that you can obtain in some sort of philosophical discussion, then the point may be mute. It's relativistic and you just do whatever. Yeah.
Because then I think
it's what we're really trying to get at, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a very good point. One of my good buddies mentioned to me the other day, really fascinating.
Right.
Kind of not the most philosophically inclined guy, but just out of the blue, really profoundly said, if you are speaking with someone,
when someone just pops out some pure gold,
just gold, absolutely gold, and just says to me, almost in passing, like, if you argue with someone whose values are not aligned with yours, there's no reason. You can't convince them of anything.
Yeah.
Because they're like, you are just going to speak past them.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have a baseline, like
you agree with nothing at this point.
You can't, because your underlying assumptions about what is good and proper is incorrect. Yeah. So what can you, as a hot button issue, if you believe abortion is completely immoral and you're killing a life, and I don't think that, by the way. But if I am on the, abortion is a woman's right, health care issue, something like that, how can we possibly agree? We have fundamentally different worldviews as to what constitutes immoral behavior. So we can talk about it all day long, but if we don't agree on the premise, then everything else is a waste of breath.
Yes.
Because what am I saying to you? I'm saying to you that this action leads to a murder, which is wrong, and you're saying it's not a murder, and I don't believe, what I mean? Like, what am I? Yeah. I don't agree with that premise.
Yeah.
So why, like, everything else you're saying about why it should be outlawed or restricted makes no sense to me, because I don't think the end thing is wrong. So that's also just a very interesting
No, I actually think that was one of the most interesting things. It actually kind of ruined me a little bit when I was at university, because there was a famous quote. I don't know who it was from, and I can't remember why. It was a mid-century, 19th century person who basically said that the source of all argument is like a disagreement on that. They're talking about different things. It's actually just they're talking past each other, disagreement on the terms, disagreement on the base assumptions, a misunderstanding. Sure. Every argument's a misunderstanding.
That makes sense.
That's I think too far, because sometimes people are saying this is black and this is white, and that's pretty straightforward in regards.
Yeah, sure.
But there's a huge thing when people are arguing. When they're arguing, a lot of the time they're actually arguing different things, and I'm arguing on my experience, your experience, what I've done, what I'm doing. To make yourself super clear is actually extremely difficult, especially in complex topics.
Well, I think if you have if we eventually have a person on who wants more of a debate, one of the most important things to do at the start of any debate, if you are a person of good reason and faith and you want to have a good discussion, is clarify your terms early. That's
exactly right, yeah.
And understand...
so hard to read, can't.
What are you talking about?
This
guy is a bloody maniac. Yeah. But make sure you understand underlying philosophical ideas that they're going to present to you and what they believe in. Otherwise, it can be, like you said, just a kind of going in circles.
Definitely.
Look, that's about what we're going to wrap up because we're out of time.
Fantastic.
But not a bad conversation.
Yeah.
What do you think, to wrap up, give me an order of the characters from best to worst.
Oh, in my moral opinion.
In your moral
well,
opinion.
let's just say best. Let's go worst first. Worst
Okay,
is
worst.
clearly the vicious character. It's a person who has
easy worst person.
It's easily the worst. It's effectively a psychopath
Sociopath, yeah.
who has no problem in
just lying, cheating, stealing.
Yeah, it's the
We
moral.
all agree that's
the
where we're
reason and the desires are both. I don't care, and they're both whatever. I'll do whatever I want.
Yeah. A nihilist, perhaps.
Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, the next one is probably the one who
Because I think this is where it gets really hard.
who knows it's wrong and can't control themselves. That's got to be the second worst. The real problem I have is which is the best is the person who, exactly what we were talking about before,
Yeah,
the
exactly.
person who knows what's the best and has no problem in doing it because they've got no desire to do otherwise. They're moral. They're aligning.
Yeah.
Or the person who's like, I really, really want to steal that car, but I'm never going to do it because I'm so good.
Yeah. Because I think
know.
that it is a little clunky, and I'm not sure if it's just a bad translation that
Yeah.
we've got, but I would agree with you on the worst two. I think I don't think that's too much controversy, and I suppose it is hard to disagree that the virtuous person is more virtuous, but I actually would say that the person who might have filthy, terrible desires and doesn't act on them is actually more virtuous.
Well, we sympathize. I'm not saying we have dirty desires, but we sympathize with this one because I'm assuming they'd
We
be
are
more
that
empathetic,
person.
right?
Well, we
they
just-
would understand the person doing the wrong.
Sure.
The virtuous person wouldn't understand anything. They wouldn't understand any
Because so
desire
why are
because
you?
they don't have it.
They don't have the desires. I
However,
like that.
if we go fully to the extreme, there's some really dirty people out there, and I can't empathize with. I can't put myself in that category either.
But you would
So it's
say
like- Yeah.
that person, the continent person,
Yeah.
doesn't act on their desires, even though they are disordered. And I would say that one probably most closely aligns to the average person. I
think it's the best we're gonna take
I've
too.
switched off
I think it's
my
the best we can
original
do.
take that most of us are incontinent, and we're all continent.
Well, the word is also crap.
It's terrible.
Literally,
What is
we're
that?
incontinent.
Yeah.
Let's go.
I do think that's probably a better characterization of true virtue is overcoming your passions.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the way to go.
I agree.
And
Can
yeah.
we do a tiny switch to Brendan for 2 seconds to say, hey,
All right.
I'd love to do it. Can you
Just
switch to yourself, Brendan?
tiny switch to Brendan. You're in, mate. Say hello to
At the end of the
folks.
podcast?
Hello, I am in.
He's in.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for giving me the shout out.
No worries, brother.
No worries, mate. Look, well, thank you very much, everybody. This has been Two Blokes in a Cave. We're hoping to get out of the cave. Join us next time. See you later.